tremendous rainstorms hit the Ohio and Mississippi valleys January 1st in 1937, and caused tremendous flooding in both valleys at the same time. Cities like Cincinnati and Louisville completely flooded and had to be evacuated.
Flooding stretched all along the Ohio and Mississippi valleys, from West Virginia to Louisiana. More than 21 inches of rain fell in January of 1937, and over 8 million acres of land were underwater, creating what one newspaper called a lake the size of Ireland. 1.5 million people were affected by this disaster, and Memphis became a refuge for thousands.
At one point in February of 37, 1 in 5 people in Memphis was a refugee. So we had between 50 and 60,000 refugees come through Memphis in about a month period. One family in particular I can think of that the water came up through the floorboards. The husband runs out, hooks up the mules to the wagon, gets his wife, gets his kids out in there, and by this point the water's up to the wheels. They get about a mile down the road and the hooves of the mules are no longer touching the ground. The wheels aren't touching the ground either. And the only thing keeps them from sinking below the waves is the momentum of the mules swimming towards the levee. People got out with basically their clothes on their backs. Now, a lot of them traveled to Memphis on foot. So they're cold, wet, and of course sick. So once they got to Memphis, they had to be quarantined. The first thing the city did was to close down the fairgrounds and use the fairgrounds amusement park as a refugee camp. National Guardsmen came in and other volunteers built additional barracks to house the refugees that were coming in. And there were over 1,000 of them coming in a day. Once the fairgrounds filled to capacity, the city shut down all the schools, and all the schools were used as hospitals.
8,000 refugees were hospitalized and cared for by the Red Cross and volunteers from the Memphis medical community. Even by today's standards, it's amazing how quickly and efficiently the city was able to act in this crisis, and how generously people opened up their hearts and their wallets.
When people would give money, the donations were listed in the newspaper, in the commercial appeal, the name and how much money they gave. And you saw people like Boss Crump or some big business owners give large amounts of money. But you go down the list all the way to the end and there are children giving change to help out. And it's remarkable how much money was raised, not just locally, but across the whole country for this. Keep in mind, this is 1937. This is the depths of the Depression. And people were still giving everything they possibly could. And it took almost no time at all for them to organize and get started.
In spite of the generosity of Memphians, life in the camps wasn't comfortable.
The buildings that were used to house the refugees weren't really made for housing refugees. I mean, the cattle barn was not a place for people. The automobile building wasn't really a place for people. But volunteers from the Red Cross and Memphians who came in to help out did the best they could. The city provided entertainment. There were different musical acts that came through. At one point, a circus came through to entertain the kids. Church groups came in, people sang songs, watched movies, things like that. But Memphians did what they could to make the refugees as comfortable as possible.
In the midst of this disaster, E.H. Crump took issue with the way Mayor Watkins Overton was handling the recovery. So the boss took charge.
Crump personally led flood control efforts on the Nonconnah Creek. So he'd stayed out there night and day, directing people, say, here, take the steam shovel over there, you guys move sandbags over there. He took it upon himself to do it. And yes, that did cause friction with the mayor, because the mayor was saying, we've already taken care of this, you really don't need to be doing this. So there were some problems there. It's like, well, who's really running the city? And by the end of the flood, it was plainly clear that it was Boss Crump.
2 years later, Crump was elected mayor for the 3rd time. He was sworn in, promptly resigned, and turned the reins over to his protege, Walter Chandler. On February 18th, the flooding ended, and the storm-weary refugees slowly began to return to what was left of their homes. The exact number of flood-related deaths remains unclear, but the flood left over $3 billion in damage in its wake, prompting the federal government to beef up flood control along the Ohio River and in Memphis. When the Mississippi River began to rise again in 2011 to near record levels, the flood control measures held the waters in check. But as Patrick O'Daniel notes, we have an uneasy truce with Old Man River.
We know that we've developed these areas that used to be runoff for the Mississippi River, all these swamplands and stuff like that that used to absorb all the floods. Well, the river doesn't know that. So we basically had this very loose truce with the river. The river will come back and claim that land, and it often does.